Hey guys, and welcome back. Today we are going to be continuing our review of our Unit 5 Essential Knowledge. So remember, Unit 5 is on land and water use. Today we're going to shift our focus specifically to water use, and we're going to be talking about the different types of irrigation. So irrigation methods. So the largest human use of fresh water is for irrigation. So we use about 70% of our fresh water for irrigation, which is a very large chunk. So when you think about what we use fresh water for, obviously for our own drinking uses, drinking for animals, livestock, and then of course irrigation. So basically using it for farms and for agriculture. So there are different types of irrigation. So these include drip irrigation, flood irrigation, furrow irrigation, and then spray irrigation. We're going to go over each one of these individually here in just the next few minutes. The picture on the screen right here, this is of the drip irrigation. So I don't know if you guys remember, you should remember, but drip irrigation is the most efficient irrigation in terms of water use. So basically, like, they run these little lines. I think they can do it where they make the structures above the plants as well. But if you see, the only water that's being used is right around the individual plants. So it's just directing the exact amount that the plants need. And so you're not wasting anything because the water's going directly to the plants. You're not overusing it. It dramatically reduces the amount of water that you use for irrigation, but it's expensive. So you kind of have to weigh the cost-benefit analysis of that. So when we're looking at this image right here is of furrow irrigation. So this involves cutting furrows, which is what you see here. So this is a furrow, and then the furrows go along the lines of the crops. So you cut those furrows between the crop rows and then fill them with water. So it's inexpensive, but about a third of the water is actually lost. So you use all this water. I'm not sure of like the amount of gallons it would take to do this type of irrigation. It would be a lot. So you use this, and yes, the crops do get watered, but you lose a third of that water. So it runs off into, our water system, streams, nearby streams, or it's evaporated and goes back into our hydrologic cycle. Now, this is where a lot of the fertilizers and the pesticides from agriculture get into the water system because there's runoff from irrigation methods like this. Another thing that you guys need to be aware of is something called waterlogging, and that occurs when too much water is left to sit in the soil, which then raises the water table or groundwater and inhibits plants' ability to absorb oxygen through their roots. So it's almost like, I don't know if you guys ever heard, when I was little, I used to love to like water my dad's plants, and he would always get kind of irritated because he'd be like, no, you can't give plants too much water. And I never understood it, being a kid. I'm like, why can't we give them more water? It's because it'll become waterlogged, and it's almost like you drown your plants. So just like you don't need excess amounts of water because it can throw like your electrolytes and stuff off balance. Plants don't need that much water because they can essentially drown because they can't uptake oxygen through their roots. So you don't want that. Flood irrigation. So this is, what kind of orchard was this? I think this was an almond orchard. So if you guys didn't know, almonds actually grow on trees. There's a lot of almond orchards out in California. And this involves flooding an agricultural field with water. So what you see here. So this would have been done on purpose. This sees about 20% of your water lost to evaporation and runoff, similar to the furrow irrigation. And obviously, too, this can lead to waterlogging of the soil. I think that almond trees do need a lot of water, and this is kind of a more of an efficient way to do this, but you do run the risk of waterlogging the soils and then getting a low crop yield because they're not able to uptake oxygen through their roots. This is spray irrigation. So this involves pumping groundwater into spray nozzles across an agricultural field. So this system is actually more efficient than the flood and furrow irrigation. So it only loses about a fourth or even less of that to runoff and evaporation. However, these systems are expensive, and it also requires energy to run. So this is that large machinery we were talking about on Monday when we talked about the Green Revolution. So this would be expensive to run, but it is more efficient. So you're not losing as much water as with flood or furrow irrigation. but it costs more. And this is on a large scale. So this machine you would see definitely on a larger scale operation, but spray irrigation can also be in like traditional sprinklers too. So if you guys ever drive through a neighborhood and you see like the sprinkler systems that are really big, like the really large ones or even just the smaller ones, those would be classified as spray irrigation as well. So some smaller, maybe organic farms would not use this particular type of machinery. They would have more of like the traditional sprinkler systems, but that would be categorized as spray irrigation as well. Drip irrigation, we started out looking at a picture of it, but just a reminder, that uses perforated hoses to release small amounts of water to the plant roots, so just what they need. It's the most efficient, and only about 5% of the water is lost to evaporation and runoff, so significantly less than our other forms of irrigation. However, it is also expensive, and so when you're thinking about your crop yield and how much you want to put into it versus how much you want to get back out, we want to make more money than we spend. So a lot of farmers don't utilize this. Something to be aware of is something called salinization. So this occurs when the salts in groundwater remain in the soil after the water evaporates. Over time, this can make soil toxic to plants. So water that we use does contain salt. And basically what happens if you deposit too much of that salt in the soil, the water is going to evaporate. Okay, so the water will evaporate back into our hydrologic cycle, but the salts don't go with it. So if you're using water to irrigate your fields that has a higher salt content and it gets deposited behind, so you're using more water than necessary, such as in the flooding or the furrow, and then you have a lot of that evaporate and the salt is left behind, it will throw off the pH balance of the soil. And plants are living organisms, so just like you and me, they want to maintain a homeostasis, so they want to keep that balance, so they don't want their soil pH thrown off. Aquifers, which are just basically holding places for groundwater, can be severely depleted if overused for agricultural irrigation, as has happened to the Ogallala aquifer, I think that's how you say it, in the central United States. And I'm going to find a video and link it for you guys to watch about that. This aquifer was a case study. I think I've seen it on FRQs before, but you just want to be aware of it. And kind of the situation surrounding that. So I'll find a video and link that for you guys in your assignment today. We're going to go over pest control methods really quick. We're going to kind of wrap that up into irrigation. We're going to talk about integrated pest management a little bit more next week. But when we talk about pest control methods, these are things like pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. So pests would be like insects, think like aphids and things that will feed on crops. Herbicides would kill plants, so those are specifically for like weeds that will come up and compete with your crops for, sunlight, oxygen, water. And then a fungicide, obviously a fungicide is something that will kill a fungus, because fungi can be harmful to agricultural crops. And then rodenticides, obviously we're going to be killing things like mice. And insecticides specifically are for bugs. So basically, we use all of these things and we get this kind of pesticide resistance treadmill. I don't know if you guys remember that term. I remember teaching it in class. But basically, it's natural selection. So you spray all of these killing chemicals on the plants, and there will be naturally resistant pests that stay behind because they just have a mutation in their genetics that make them resistant. So what happens is over time, the more and more these pesticides are used, the more we see those resistance genes in the pests, because the ones that live are the ones that have the mutation that make them immune to the pesticides. And then they will be the ones to survive and go on and breed. And so natural selection, therefore, determines that there will be more pesticide-resistant pests. So then you have to find another pesticide to use, right? To kill the pests, to find something that they're actually susceptible to. Well, now there's going to be new genes popping up to make them resistant. So it just goes and goes and goes. And basically this will create crop damage by pests, because they're not going to be susceptible to those pesticides anymore. But then it's just a constant cycle. of spraying our food with chemicals and then trying to find stronger chemicals to kill the pests that are now resistant, yada, 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 on it goes. Crops can be genetically engineered to increase their resistance to pests, which, again, you guys know about GMOs, throwback to biology, right? But it can lead to a loss of genetic diversity of particular crops. So like examples of that would be definitely soybean and canola. Those crops are totally saturated. The market is saturated with genetically modified crops. And when you do that, remember in the beginning of this course, we talked about biodiversity as being a very good thing. You want to have a diversity of different kinds of crops, of different strains of these crops, because if there were to be some type of, disease that comes through or some kind of pest that comes through that, these genetically modified crops aren't necessarily resistant to, then it would wipe them out, right? There's no genetic diversity to kind of fill that void. There's no alternates that could survive that particular, plight if that were to happen. So you have to be careful. Genetic diversity is something that we want. Now, I'm not saying that I'm never going to be somebody that demonizes GMOs from a scientific standpoint, because I think it's a very just testament to scientific progress as a whole that we can modify crops to be drought resistant and pest resistant and all of these other things. But we have to be careful in the use of our technology, right? Like, how much is too much? What are the environmental effects of it? And a decrease in genetic diversity is definitely one of those things. Okay, so that's it for today, focusing on water use and irrigation, threw in that pest control, just so we can get in or through this Unit 5 a little bit quicker. We'll probably wrap it up next Wednesday. So you guys are going to have an assignment today. It's a web quest. It's shorter than the one that you guys had last week. When you open the document, it'll ask you to make a copy. You can type all of your answers directly into the Word doc, or it's a Google Doc. And so you can share it with me directly, or if you want to convert it to a Word and upload it as a file, that totally works too. So go ahead and work on that. If you have any questions, let me know. I will be on Zoom Wednesday. So on Wednesday at 11 a.m. I think that's what I scheduled it for. So hop onto Zoom, come see me. I'm going to be going over the experimental design assignment that you guys had on Monday. So we'll be going over that. And if you guys just want to come say, hey, chat a little bit, we can talk about your AP exam. That would be great. So I hope to see you guys there. And if you have any questions, let me know.